Do.
Thank you, Glenn. Could you let me know when I have 5 minutes left? Thank you. Thank you. I feel so blessed. They said stay in the middle of the herd, and I do. And I brought the herd with me. My name is Deb, and I'm an alcoholic. And God removed me from alcohol on April 18th, 2013. I have a sponsor. He's here at this meeting. I have sponsees. I sponsor a lot of men and women. My home group is called the Only Booze Group, and it's in Belmore, Long Island. Um, so April 18, 2013 was not my original sober date. I actually came in 1993, sometime in April. I don't remember the exact date, maybe the 7th or the 8th of April. Um, I um, I take my sponsees not only through the big book. I try to be a three legacy sponsor. I take them through the traditions when they're done with the big book, and then I take them through the concepts for dummies from the illustrated concepts because I'm not so great at that. Um, I'm a very active member. I have my own meeting on Sundays that I facilitate. It's called Without You, There Is No Me. It's named that in as an homage to Liz Bailey, who had been in my life for over 30 years. She's now passed away. A very special person. I do different kinds of service. I'm a speaker seeker for about 12 groups. That keeps me plenty busy. And I also send out flyers every evening to about 20 WhatsApp groups and to individuals that have told me they need flyers and don't have that app. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself, what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. So I grew up with parents that came from North Africa. They didn't speak English, and it was a little bit. Was, it was a little bit different the way I felt when I was in school, from the other kids whose houses I went to after school to play, where their parents were, they all spoke English and they were a part of like making sure we had a snack and things like that. My mom was an addict, and when I was 7 years old, she went into rehab. It was the first time I remember her going to rehab. She had been many times since to rehab, and while she was away, I was after school going upstairs in the building we lived in to be babysat for by I thought my mother's friend in the building, but instead it was her 14-year-old son who was babysitting for me. And he sexually abused me on a regular basis. But I have to tell you, that's not why I'm an alcoholic, because bad things happen to non-alcoholics too. I'm an alcoholic because once I pick up that drink, it kicks off that phenomenon of craving. And I can't stop. There's no way once I pick up a drink. I am bodily and mentally different than my fellows. How do I know this? I used to go after work with my friends for a drink. They'd have one or two and they'd get on the railroad and they would go home. And there I was still sitting in that bar as if my bar stool had crazy glue on it. I could not get up and I could not understand why. And it wasn't until I got to AA that I understood that I'm a real alcoholic, as described on page 21. It's not to say that I'm arrogant or anything like that. We have three classifications of alcoholics in the big book, and I fall under the real alcoholic because I get insanely drunk and I do terrible things when I drink. I was restless, irritable, and discontented before I even picked up a drink. I had no problem admitting my life was unmanageable when I got here. But I couldn't say that I was an alcoholic. It just wouldn't register with me, even with everything that happened to me. But my life was definitely unmanageable. And I was living in the bedevilments. And they talk about those bedevilments on page 52. They describe not being able to have relationships with people, having, you know, uh, being unable to behave in the household. I didn't know how to have relationships with anyone, not my parents, not my siblings, not my friends, not my coworkers. People were always angry at me and I could never understand why. Um, no, I wanted to be married. Let's put it that way. That was a big word for me. I wanted. And, I wanted what other people had all the time, or I'd read magazines and I'd want things from the magazines that were impossible for me to obtain. So what happened with me was, I wanted to be like everyone else, but I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to act in this world. I had no idea. I wanted to be married. And so when I had a chance to be married, I wasn't in love with the guy, but I married him under false pretenses. I thought he had money and I wanted that security. He was playing the stock market puts and calls. He was betting on that a stock would come in or not come in by a certain date. And I said, well, he must have money to do that. And, so I married him, even though I wasn't in love with him. And of course, he didn't know. And then on top of that, when I drank, I was physically abusive to my husband, not just verbally and emotionally abusive. I would put my hands on him. And I married a man that never raised his voice and never raised a pinky at me. But when I did hit him, he would call the cops. And we had a domestic violence unit. And there were two cops that kept showing up at my home, and I had to give them nicknames because they were regulars. There was a really tall cop, and I nicknamed him Effin' Lurch. And it didn't matter what height his partner was, he became Effin' Pee-wee by default. And they were always in my home, and they kept asking my husband to press charges against me, and he refused every time. So it was like a revolving door. Some of the things I did to my husband, like he came home from work one day and he saw that the dishes hadn't been done in days. And he said, how come there's still dishes in the sink? That's all he said. And I had been drinking and, I get extremely aggressive when I drink. And I went to that sink and I took the dishes and I broke them. I just threw them on the floor one after the other after the other. And I said, now there's no dishes. And I left him to clean up the mess. My husband was a sports memorabilia collector. And one of the things that was proudly hanging in the foyer, encased in glass and framed, was he loved Larry Bird from the Boston Celtics. And so this is what I do to people. When you hurt me or I perceive you hurt me, I get back to you tenfold. And so he was upset with my drinking one day. And so I took a hammer and I broke the glass. And then I took a butcher knife and I shredded this autographed uniform. And while I was doing it, I was regretting what I was doing, but I just couldn't stop myself. Pride and ego, I have no idea. But I was sorry the minute I did it, but I wouldn't say it. And, this is the way I behaved. I have a daughter at the time that when I came to AA, she was turning 8. So for the last 3 years of my drinking, she got to witness a mother that was so not kind. I never abused my daughter, but I was a negligent mother. And my first sponsor said to me, negligence is a part of abuse. So I wasn't able to help my daughter with her homework after school. Thank God she knew where the snack drawer was. I wasn't capable of making dinner. I was able to put together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a tuna fish sandwich, and that was it. I wasn't capable of bathing my daughter or reading her a bedtime story, and I will forever be grateful to my husband for being both mother and father to her. And, my daughter, one day I was laying on the couch, I was hungover, and she was about 7 at the time, and she said, Mommy, how come you never play with me? And I said to her, well, there are mommies that play and there are mommies that don't play. I'm a mommy that doesn't play. And that really broke my heart to say it. And the more I neglected her, the more I drank so I wouldn't have to feel those feelings. I was working at the time for a fabulous company. I worked for IBM and I had a really good job. But my bosses would say to me, Deb, you're a great worker when you're here. I'm not the type of alcoholic that can show up at work when I've been drinking because I'm either still drunk in the morning, still drinking, or my hangovers are so bad I cannot pick my head up off the pillow. And so I don't make it to work a lot. But IBM has unlimited sick pay, a full employment policy, which means that it's really hard to fire you. They gave out promotions and pay raises that were phenomenal and rewards. And I kept getting mixed messages because they kept promoting me and they kept giving me these amazing increases in my salary. But then one day I got a boss. In IBM, either you're promoted every 11 to 14 months or your boss is. So I kind of nicknamed IBM, I've been moved. So there's a lot of bosses going around during the time I was working there. And the last boss that I had at IBM scared me. He called me into his office. He said, I know all about you. If you ever pull out sick while you're working for me, I'll fire you on the phone. And I knew that this guy meant it, and I didn't want to lose my job. So here it is. It's a Sunday night. I'm sitting on the couch, and I'm drinking as usual. I have my spot all the time on the couch. And I'm always looking at the clock saying, okay, I'm going to stop drinking at 9 o'clock. I'll have my last drink at 10 o'clock. But before you know it, it's the middle of the night or it's early in the morning and there is no way I'm going to make it to work. And I don't want to lose my job. So this is where my alcohological thinking comes in because only an alcoholic thinks this way. I'm going to tell them that I fell down my staircase and I'm injured and I can't make it in. But I'm also going to elaborate and say that I fell head first. No one does that. No one adds and embellishes already calling in sick except for an alcoholic. So I had to make it look good. And so I took my face and I rubbed it against the rug 50, 60 times. I had a rug burn from up here to down here. Then I went out into the staircase, took my shoulder, kept banging it in the banister until I dislocated it. And mind you, I did not feel a thing. I was that drunk. And then I walked down my stairs to the bottom and I hit my head against the wall until I tore skin. Then I laid there very dramatically and I called for my husband and he saw me there and he took me to the emergency room and that bought me 2 weeks of not having to go to work. Now, if you looked at my face and my injuries, you would have thought I fell down the staircase of the Empire State Building. I only have 6 steps. It's totally impossible to have the kind of injuries that I sustained falling down 6 steps, but no one seemed to notice that. Now, the bad part about having those 2 weeks off from work is now I've become a daily drinker. Now I don't have to go to work, so now I'm drinking every day. And when it came time to go back to work, it was that much harder. I just couldn't go back to work. And I thought, well, I'll call my boss and tell him it's too soon. I'm still in a lot of pain. And so I did that. And he said, you're fired. So I lost my job and now I have no life. My life is so revolves around drinking. When I was in college, I had to leave early because college was interfering with my drinking. I was a bar drinker before I couldn't leave my home. I was isolated from people at the end of my drinking and I could just sit on my couch by myself. I didn't see people, family, friends, nothing. But before it got to that point, I would drink at the bars and, I would do that walk of shame. I don't know how many men I slept with. I don't know who they were. I would come to in the morning. I don't know where I am. I don't know how I'm getting home. And worse, what am I going to say to my husband where I've been all night and why I didn't call to say I'm not going to come home. So it was like that all the time. And I was so afraid of getting pregnant. And what I did say to myself, oh, Debbie, this is a problem. You shouldn't be drinking out in the bars. And instead I said to myself, well, maybe I better get my tubes tied so I don't bring home a baby. And I was 30 years old and I went to my doctor and she said, you're 30. That's so young. Don't you want any more children? And I said, absolutely not, because I was so scared of getting pregnant. These are extreme things that I did to protect my drinking. That's who I was. Well, so now I don't have a job. I don't have a reason to even wake up every day. I can't stop drinking and I don't know how. I don't know anything about AA. And I just want to die. I'm done with this world. I'm tired. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I didn't know there was a solution. And so I decided now I don't have any drugs in my story, only alcohol. So I have a medicine cabinet that only had ibuprofen, nothing else. And I said to myself, you better take all those ibuprofen. I think it was a bottle of 100. And I washed it down with a bottle of gin. And I said to myself, that's enough ibuprofen that'll probably damage one of my organs, my stomach, my kidneys, my liver, I don't know, to the point where I might die from it. And that's what my objective was, to die. And so I took those pills and I drank that gin and I started drunk dialing. And first I called my husband at work and I said to him I was dying. It was his fault because he didn't know how to love me. I don't think anybody would know how to love me. I was not lovable back then. I was a very angry woman and a very ungrateful child. I can't even begin to tell you how I treated my mother. Thank God I got to reconcile all that in recovery. And then I called my mother next and I told her it was her fault because she was an addict. And then I called my friends and I told them they were never there to support me. And one of them must have called 911. So in comes the paramedic, and who do you think is with them? Effing Lurchin, effing Pee-wee. And I looked at them and I said, this is all your fault because you kept interfering in my marriage. And I looked at the paramedic who had the sweetest face of an angel. And I said, I'm not going with you. I know the law. You can't take me if I don't want to come with you unless I go into cardiac arrest. You're going to have to watch me have a heart attack first before you can take me. And all of a sudden, effing Lurch, I'm laying in bed and he just puts his face close to mine. Maybe he was going to tell me something. I don't know why he did that. Maybe he knew I was belligerent and angry. And when he did that, I punched him in the jaw. And I don't go around punching cops. That's not me. But when that happened, he put handcuffs on me. His partner put ankle shackles on me. And he said, guess what, sweetheart? Now we can take you. And they took me to a psych ward. They did not take me to jail, and I'm very grateful for that. And I want you to know that when I was 6 months or either 90 days or 6 months sober, I ran into Lurch and Pee-wee. And I knew their names 30 years ago. I don't remember them today, but I made an amends to them, and they were so happy to see me looking so good and doing so well. Um, so anyway, they take me to the psych ward. The psych ward sends me to the rehab. And they told me that I should read that doctor's opinion, that was a very important chapter in the book. And so I did. I read the doctor's opinion, and I finally understood what was wrong with me, that I had an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind, that if I picked up that first drink, that would kick off that phenomenon of craving, and I wouldn't be able to stop. And that's exactly what was wrong with me. Everything I read in the doctor's opinion, they said I needed a spiritual solution to my spiritual malady. And I said, oh, how on earth am I going to do that? Because what I forgot to tell you was when my mom came home from rehab, she wasn't done. So she wanted to be alone in the apartment to do what she was doing prior to going to rehab. And she wanted to send me back upstairs to the babysitter. And I told her why I didn't want to go in my little 7-year-old voice. And she picked up the phone and she looked at me and she said, God said you're lying. Now, I don't know. She was a sick woman. So, I forgive her, of course, when I became recovered. I forgave her because she wasn't thinking right. So that took care of God. So I came into, when I left the rehab, they said, go to a meeting immediately. And, put your hand up and say you need a sponsor and that you're new. And so it was Mother's Day when I left that rehab. I left in the afternoon, and that evening I was at a meeting local, and I put my hand up. I said, I just got out of rehab today and I need a sponsor. And a woman came over to me after the meeting and said, would you like to go for a cup of coffee? And I said, I would love that. And we went for coffee, and she told me a little bit about her story. I told her a little bit about mine, and then she brought up God. And I said, please don't bring up God. I don't believe in God. And I told her why. And she said, do you believe I believe in God? And I said, yeah, I could do that. That was not a big deal. And she said, that's great. She said, that's your little mustard seed of faith. When we got to the third step, she read that big book with me every single day and explained it line by line. And all she asked of me was to take someone else through the book when I was done. And she would, when we got to step 3, she said, you can recreate your life in the third step. You can choose your own conception of God. Make him anything you want to make him. And so I made him a dear friend, one that I loved and respected, one that I knew would never forsake me, that would always be there for me. And, sometimes, I wasn't a good friend. I wasn't spending enough time with my God. And I can tell that I was becoming a little off. I had, I was going, my sponsor had made me go to every kind of meeting that was out there. Every day was a different meeting. I went to closed meetings, beginners meetings, open meetings, big book studies, not big book meetings. She made the distinction for me, step meetings and tradition meetings, whether I understood what was going on or not. She voluntold me to be at the door to greet people on my first day at the home group. I didn't know that that's something you raise your hand for in a business meeting. And every time my commitments were up, I had to take the next commitment. My home group was in Queens, in Bayside, and the church was a full city block. So the gymnasium downstairs was huge, and we would get on a Friday night. We met on Mondays and Fridays, and we would get about 100 to 150 people at this meeting. And, when you did setup, you were there at least 2 hours before the meeting started. But the best part about that, it was you and 2 or 3 other people. And it was the meeting before the meeting. And it was so good. And even cleanup. I remember my first night of the cleanup commitment. somebody handed me a mop and I looked at the size of that room and I took that mop to a corner of that gymnasium and I started crying. I didn't want anyone to see my face. And I said, I'm never coming back to AA again. And they stopped me and they said, we're just trying to teach you how to, wear life like a loose fitting garment, to make fun of yourself, you could take your program seriously, but don't take yourself so seriously. And then we went to the diner after that. I loved going to the diner after meetings. So many great things were discussed at those tables. And so, yeah, so I started after 19 years, the maintenance of my spiritual condition started to wane. And I didn't even see that happening. Like, I was getting further and further away from my daily practices, and I didn't see it. And then all of a sudden, not having God in my life on a regular basis all day long, like it was in the beginning, I was vulnerable. When I was at my home group one night, the rehab came in, Creedmoor, and the women all sat with the women and the men with the men. And this is me. Once again, I'm the only one putting my phone number in the book and giving my number to these girls, and no one else in my home group is doing that. And I was getting angry. I got a resentment. I didn't go to God with my resentment. I didn't go to my sponsor with my resentment. That was my last straw. And so I left the meeting and I went to the liquor store and I picked up a pint of gin. And for the next 6 months, I started drinking and I could not stop drinking. I kept coming to all over my apartment, black and blue everywhere. And then after those 6 months of drinking, my daughter sat me down and she said, Mom, you need to see this video. And it was a video of me in my underwear. I opened the refrigerator. I pulled out the vegetable bin. That would be the crisper, Papa Louis. And I crouched down and I urinated in it. I was so embarrassed. I was humiliated. And I looked at my daughter and I said, I'm so sorry. I'm going back to AA tomorrow. And I did. We were in the process of moving from Queens to Long Island. And I went to a meeting immediately. I have 10 years back. And I really threw myself the harder into AA. I allowed myself not to feel humiliation for doing a day count again. I said, you're going to do your day count with gusto. You're going to be happy about having those days back. I acted as if. And when you act as if, it just happens for you. And I'm a late bloomer to Facebook. And so I signed on to Facebook and I found these AA groups, these little private AA groups. And I was, and I hadn't lost all my knowledge of the big book or how to stay sober or anything. And people were putting up messages. I live on a farm in England. There are no meetings next to me, near me. I need someone to take me through the book. And because Facebook has Messenger, which, doing this today, I was not like scared of Zoom because I had been taking people through the big book on video Messenger. And that's what I would do. I would take 2 people every 6 months through the big book, seeing each other on the screen like this until they did their steps. And I did it for such a long time. And, I had a really great home group. I just changed home groups, but, my home group that I came from is very enthusiastic. When you walk through the doors, it's like electrifying to be there. Everyone's talking and hugging and laughing, and women are going over to women they've never seen before, and men going over to men and immediately start working with people. I've seen the guys, in my No Frills home group, take a newcomer downstairs to the basement and start talking to them and working with them right away. It's a great home group, but it was no longer convenient for me to make it there at the time of the home group. So that's why I have a new home group. Um, so um, so what happened is when the pandemic came, I was okay. I was not afraid. And so I started meeting men and women all over the country that were looking for someone to take them through the work, because honestly, sponsorship is about taking people through the book and helping guide them to find a God of their understanding, and not Debbie. My sponsor says, less Debbie, more God. I need to lose myself and just let them concentrate on their relationship with God. Their relationship with me is not as important. And so I do that, and I throw myself into service all the time too. When I wake up in the morning now, the first thing I say is, God, get into my head before I do. That's my first words. It's not original. I took that from Clancy. I heard Clancy say that a long time ago. Because my first sponsor was Bicoastal. She was from Santa Monica. She spent 6 months in New York and 6 months in Santa Monica, and she was a part of the Pacific group. And so she introduced me to the Atlantic group. And that's where I met Clancy. And I loved everything that Clancy was about. Um, and um, and I would read pages 86 to 88, and I would get a divorce every day. I would divorce myself from self-pity, anger, resentment, and fear. Every day I had to get a divorce because I don't remember the next day, what I did yesterday. I have to keep my recovery in the present moment. And I always ask God to please put someone on my path that I could be of service to. And it doesn't have to be an alcoholic. It could be anybody. It could be the lady in the supermarket who can't reach the shelf. I just ask God to help me be useful to other people. Use me, God, any way you want to. And I'm doing some work with my sponsor, my current sponsor, on emotional sobriety. And it's been, we only started working on this recently, but it's a path I've never been down. And I'm very excited about everything he's asking me to do. Um, you know, my job is to greet God's kids at either the virtual door or the brick and mortar door. When you come into a meeting and I don't know you, my job is to make you feel welcome, to get you a cup of coffee, to sit with you, to give you my number, to take your number. Very important because they don't call you, and we shouldn't expect them to ask us for sponsorship. They're new. They don't know what's going on. So I always call them first and I bring up sponsorship. I tell them, it's not a marriage. Let's see how this works, but let's try it. And they usually do. I want to be known as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, not just a meeting attender. I heard Debbie D say that. Be a member, not just a meeting attender. And that's very important too. And I think I've run out of things to tell you except thank you. Thank you so much, Glenn, for asking me to speak at your meeting today. It's been an honor and a privilege to speak at an AA meeting. And I can't wait to see you in March in Tennessee at the Appalachian Roundup. This will be my third one. So we do know each other going on 3 years now, Glenn. And I want to thank my family, my herd, for being here to support me as well, and my sponsor and my sponsees. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.